Payback times.
The scent of freshly ground Ethiopian yirgacheffe and warm, melted butter from the morning's first batch of croissants hit me the moment I pushed through the door. I let my shoulder bag slide to the floor behind the counter, not breaking stride as my eyes performed the daily asset inventory. 2.4 seconds to greet a customer, check. Pastry case fully stocked, lemon tarts aligned with military precision, check. Leo, my morning shift lead, purged the espresso machine steam wand with a sharp hiss. The line was 5 deep, a gentle murmur of morning conversation threading through the indie folk playlists. To anyone else, it was a cozy, successful cafe. To me, it was a living, breathing entity operating under a specific set of binding covenants. I could almost see the clauses hanging in the air. "Morning, Anika," Leo called, already tamping a fresh portafilter. "The Sumatra's pulling a little fast today," adjusted the grind. "Good catch," I said, my voice warm. "Let me taste the next one." He nodded. I didn't micromanage, I verified. That was the difference. 18 years in the gilded trenches of corporate law, structuring mergers where a misplaced comma could shift millions, had trained me to see systems, not just surfaces. A franchise agreement was a constitution for a micronation, with rights, responsibilities, and limitations clearly, or sometimes not so clearly, delineated. I settled at my usual small table in the back corner, the one with a sightline to the door, the register, and the service bar. Power position. Old habits. I pulled out my tablet and tapped into the Brew and Gather franchise portal. The dashboard loaded, a symphony of metrics in cheerful, corporate-approved greens and blues. Sales year over year were up 22%. Customer satisfaction scored 4.8 out of 5. Royalty payments were current. Advertising fund contributions were remitted on the 5th of every month, like clockwork. A small, satisfied smile touched my lips. This was my second act. After 2 decades of facilitating other people's dreams, I'd wanted something tangible, something rooted in community. Brew and Gather had promised that with a recognized brand and a neighborhood heart ethos. I'd done my due diligence, or so I'd thought. I'd read the franchise disclosure document, all 287 pages of it, and negotiated a few minor points. I'd signed with my eyes open, or so I'd believed. A notification chimed softly, an email from the franchise head office, sender Julian Thorne, Regional Franchise Director. The subject line read, Annual Performance Review, Sharma Unit Number 0427. Congratulations. I opened it. The language was effusive, layered with exclamation points and brand jargon about market-leading performance and exemplary brand ambassadorship. It was signed with a florid digital signature. The attachment was the formal review, a PDF that no doubt echoed the praise. It was supposed to feel good, but a lifetime of parsing subtext had wired me differently. Praise from a counterparty who held power over your operations was never just praise. It was data. It was positioning. It was sometimes a distraction. I flagged the email for later and was about to close my tablet when another message popped up, this one from a personal Gmail address. The sender name made me pause. Marco Pirelli. Another Brew and Gather franchisee from Hartford? We weren't friends, but we were allies in the loosest sense, members of the same tribe, bound by the same franchise agreement. His email was short and devoid of salutation. Anika, hope business is strong. Heard through the grapevine you're killing it. Listen, have you caught any wind about headquarters reevaluating footprint strategy in our region? Got a weird vibe from my last check-in call. Maybe nothing. Let me know if you hear anything. Marco. I read it twice. Reevaluating footprint strategy. In corporate speak, that could mean anything from updated marketing materials to a complete restructuring of territorial rights. The weird vibe was the key piece of intelligence. Marco was a sharp, third-generation restaurateur. He could smell a problem in his kitchen from the dining room. If his instincts were twitching, mine went to a heightened state of alert. I typed a brief, careful reply. Thanks, Marco. Business is good. Haven't heard anything specific, but I'll keep my ears open. Let's stay in touch on this. I didn't commit to anything, didn't speculate, but I'd just been handed a piece of a puzzle I didn't know I was supposed to be solving. The morning rush ebbed into a steady, comfortable hum. I was reviewing the weekly order for our coffee bean supplier when the front doorbells chimed with a particular assertive rhythm. I looked up. Julian Thorne swept in, a man designed for mid-market franchising. Late 50s, trim in a navy brew and gather polo shirt and khakis that had never seen a wrinkle. His smile was wide, his teeth very white, and his eyes performed a rapid scan of the premises the moment he entered, just as mine had. His gaze landed on me, and the smile widened further. Anika, there she is, the star of the Northeast. He moved toward me, hand extended. His grip was firm and practiced. Julian, what a surprise, I said, rising. Coffee? Wouldn't say no to a black eye. Double shot of your finest in a drip coffee. He chuckled, as if sharing a private joke about his own caffeine addiction. I caught Leo's eye and gave a slight nod. Coming right up. Please, sit. He took the chair opposite me, his posture relaxed but radiating a contained energy. I was in the area for a site visit on a potential new location up in Westbrook, and I had to stop by. I just sent your review. Stellar, Anika, truly stellar. You're operating at a platinum level. Thank you, I said, keeping my tone pleased but professional. The team here is fantastic. We've been lucky to be embraced by the neighborhood. Luck is the residue of design, he quoted smoothly. You've designed a brilliant operation. It's exactly the model we want to replicate. He accepted the mug from Leo with another flash of teeth. Thanks, champ. Leo gave a tight smile and retreated. Julian took a sip and nodded in approval. Perfect. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping into a confiding register. You know, the executive team is taking a hard look at our entire network. The brand is growing fast. There's tremendous demand. We have to be strategic about how we maximize that potential. Here it was, the pivot. I took a slow sip of my own tea, letting the peppermint steam wash over my face. Maximizing potential sounds promising. It is, he enthused. It's about synergy and ensuring our franchise partners are positioned for maximum success. Part of that is a top-to-bottom review of our territorial models. Some of the older agreements were drawn up in a different era. The market dynamics have changed. What was a protected territory a few years ago might now be underutilized space. We're looking at more dynamic, brand-centric models. Every hair on the back of my neck stood up. Older agreements, protected territory, underutilized. These weren't casual words. They were legal and strategic terms, lobbed into a conversation over coffee like casual confetti. He was testing the waters. Dynamic models, I repeated, my voice neutral. Interesting. Does that mean revisiting the radius clauses in the existing franchise agreements? His eyes flickered just for a millisecond. He hadn't expected the precise terminology. A franchise lawyer would have asked that. A hopeful entrepreneur would have asked about more customers. Oh, all the components are on the table for discussion, he said, recovering smoothly. It's a process. The goal is brand elevation for everyone. A rising tide lifts all boats. He leaned back, his message delivered. But hey, don't you worry. Top performers like you are the cornerstone of this brand. You'll be consulted every step of the way. The phrase consulted every step of the way did nothing to soothe me. In contract law, consultation is not consent. It's a procedural step, often a box to be ticked before a unilateral decision is implemented. We made more small talk. He praised the new seasonal lavender latte and asked about community events. But my mind was already elsewhere, back in the dense, single-space text of the document that governed my life's work. After 15 minutes, he stood, clapped me on the shoulder with a hearty keep up the great work, and was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of department store cologne and a deep, professional unease. The cafe closed at 8. By 8:30, the floors were mopped, the machines cleaned, the chairs upturned on tables. The quiet was profound, broken only by the hum of the coolers. I locked the front door, poured myself a small glass of Sancerre from the bottle I kept for occasions that demanded clarity, not celebration, and carried it to the back office. From the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, I pulled out 2 heavy binders. The first held the franchise disclosure document, a tomb of promises and prescriptions. The second held the operations manual, a living document that could be changed by the franchisor with 30 days' notice. Together, they formed the Bible of my business. I opened the franchise agreement first. I hadn't read it like this, not as Anika Sharma, hopeful small business owner, but as Anika Sharma, former partner at Clayton and Weiss, who had made a career out of finding the fissures in seemingly solid rock. I started at the beginning, my finger tracing the lines. The initial fees and royalties, the $85,000 franchise fee, paid upfront and non-refundable. The ongoing royalty of 6% of gross sales, paid weekly. The advertising fund contribution of another 2%. Standard, the lifeblood of the franchisor. My mind automatically calculated the lifetime value of my unit to them. It was a significant number. I was a valuable asset. That was good. Valuable assets are sometimes protected, but more often they are leveraged. The standards of operation. This was the heart of their control. I had to use their approved suppliers, their approved software, their approved decor. I had to maintain hours of operation they dictated and submit to unannounced inspections. This was the trade-off. I'd known that. But reading it now, after Julian's visit, the clauses felt less like guidelines and more like shackles. The manual supplemented this with 1,000 tiny rules. Breach of these standards was grounds for termination. Grounds, a legal term hiding in plain sight, the territorial rights. This was where my finger stopped. This was the map. The description of the geographic area in which I had the exclusive right to operate, and to which Brew and Gather promised not to operate another company-owned store or grant another franchise. The text was a masterpiece of vague precision. The franchised business was located at my address. The franchisee was granted a protected territory defined as a circular radius extending 1.5 miles from the geographic center point of the aforementioned premises, as depicted on the attached map. I turned to the exhibit. It was a simple street map, a circle drawn with a compass around a point marked with a star at my address. It looked definitive, it felt definitive, but my lawyer's brain began picking at the seams. Geographic center point of the aforementioned premises. Was that the center of the building's footprint? The center of the lot? The center of the main customer entrance? In a dense urban block, that could be a difference of 50 feet, shifting the radius enough to clip a lucrative office building or a new apartment complex. Ambiguity in a contract always favors the party who didn't draft it. Brew and Gather had drafted it. And then I remembered Julian's sales pitch from 2 years ago, sitting at this very desk. He'd unfolded a larger, more detailed map. He said the whole corridor from the river up to Highland Avenue and from 5th Street over to the University District was mine. That was my kingdom. That was the Brew and Gather promise. I looked from the vague textual description to the simple circle on the map. The corridor he'd described with such sweeping confidence was irregular, shaped by natural and commercial boundaries. The circle was just a circle, a geometric simplification that inevitably left pockets of ambiguity inside and outside its line. A discrepancy, a quiet, fundamental misalignment between the verbal promise and the written reality. In court, the written document almost always wins. The Brew and Gather promise was just salesmanship. The 4 corners of that exhibit were the law. My heart began to beat a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. This wasn't paranoia. This was pattern recognition. The glowing review. Marco's email about footprint strategy. Julian's casual mention of reevaluating territorial models. And now this clever ambiguity in the core document that defined my protected space. They weren't just looking at the network. They were looking at the map. And my map, I realized with a cold, clarifying certainty, had been drawn with faint lines on purpose. It wasn't an accident. It was a loophole. And a loophole isn't a flaw. It's a doorway, left ajar for someone to walk through later. I closed the binder. The sound was a dull, final thud in the silent office. The fine print wasn't just fine, it was the only print that mattered. And I had just discovered it was written in disappearing ink. The quiet of my office the night before had been a cocoon of intellectual alarm. The morning after was all about tactical calm. I moved through the pre-open routine on autopilot, my smile for the staff genuine, but my mind whirring in a different gear. Julian's visit, Marco's email, the ambiguous map, they weren't isolated incidents, they were data points. My legal training screamed that when a counterparty controls all communication channels, isolates the players, and mixes praise with vague threats, they're building a narrative that usually ends with them holding all the chips. I needed to break my isolation, but I couldn't do it recklessly. Contacting other franchisees could be construed as violating a non disparagement clause, or worse, as forming an illegal group under some broadly written clause about interference. I had to be a surgeon, not a sledgehammer. First, I reread Marco's email. Heard through the grapevine you're killing it. How? The franchisee portal had no form, no chat function. Our annual meeting in Chicago had been a series of motivational speeches, not networking sessions. Julian had always emphasized we were individual entrepreneurs, that our success was based on our unique local execution, not on comparing spreadsheets. It was a classic divide and conquer strategy, dressed up as empowerment. Marco had a grapevine. That meant others were talking carefully in the shadows. I had to find the shadows. I waited until the midday lull, took my tea to the back alley, where the only sounds were the dumpster hum and distant traffic, no chance of being overheard. I called Marco's cell, the number from his email signature. He answered on the third ring, his voice guarded. Marco Pirelli. Marco, it's Anika Sharma, from Haversham. A beat of silence, then a release of breath. Anika, thanks for calling back. You said you had a weird vibe. I've got one now, too. My regional director paid me a surprise visit yesterday. Talked about reevaluating territorial models. I kept my voice even, factual. He let out a short, humorless laugh. Yeah, that sounds familiar. He's been suggestive with me, saying my territory, which includes a big new residential development, is more market than one unit can handle, hinting that a corporate-owned flagship store nearby would boost brand awareness for me. My stomach tightened. And how does he suggest you handle that? He floated the idea of a voluntary territory adjustment, a minor redrawing of the map, in the brand's best interest. Made it sound like a favor, like I'd be a team player. When I asked to see the proposed new map, he got vague, said it was all preliminary. A voluntary adjustment, of course. It bypassed the contractual amendment process and avoided any potential claims of breach. It relied on pressure and persuasion. And if one franchisee volunteered, it set a precedent. This wasn't just about me and my fuzzy circle. This was a regional strategy. We need to talk, I said, in person, not near either of our cafes. We met 2 days later at a generic, bustling diner halfway between Haversham and Hartford. Marco was a bear of a man in his late 50s, with thick, silvering hair and thoughtful eyes that missed nothing. We slid into a cracked vinyl booth, ordered coffee we didn't really want, and got down to business. He'd brought his franchise disclosure document. I had mine. We didn't exchange the binders. That would be too obvious, but we placed them on the table between us like sacred texts. We compared notes, clause by clause, speaking in low tones under the clatter of dishes. His territorial description was different. His was defined by zip codes. Mine was a radius. A third type I learned from him belonged to a franchisee in New Haven, defined by specific street boundaries. The inconsistency was glaring. There was no standard, which meant there was no clear defensible precedent. Confusion in contract law is a weapon for the drafter. He's been pushing harder since my second quarter sales dipped 3%, Marco confessed, stirring his coffee endlessly. Suddenly, I'm getting support calls every week, questions about my marketing spend, my labor ratios. It feels less like support and more like an audit building a case. I nodded. They're looking for leverage, operational defaults, or even the perception of underperformance to justify reevaluating your territory. Can they do that? He asked, and I heard the frustration of a brilliant restaurateur facing a legal maze. It depends, I said carefully. On the termination clauses. Right there in the greasy diner, I began the education as a shared exploration. Every franchise agreement has them. They're usually two-tiered. There are curable defaults, things like being a day late on a royalty payment or a minor violation of the operations manual. You get a written notice and a period, usually 30 days, to fix it. That's your cure period. Marco listened intently, his frustration sharpening into focus. Then, I continued, there are incurable or immediate termination events: fraud, abandonment, conviction of a felony, bankruptcy. These are the nuclear options. They can't just terminate you because they feel like it. They need a contractual trigger. I paused, letting it sink in. The threat comes from blurring those lines, making you think a minor, curable issue is a major breach, making you feel unstable. He leaned back, absorbing it. So when Julian hints that my underperformance might lead to reassessment, he's either bluffing or laying groundwork to manufacture a curable default. Exactly. And if you're isolated and scared, you might just volunteer to adjust your territory to make the pressure stop. That's what he's banking on. Marco's jaw set. Well, he can bank on this. I'm not volunteering a damn thing. He looked at me. What's your play, Anika? You didn't just call to compare notes. We need legal advice, real independent counsel, not the franchisor's friendly franchise relations people, and we need to see if this is a pattern. Are there others? He knew of two more in our broad region, Carla in Stamford and Derek in a wealthy suburb outside of Providence. He'd exchanged wary texts with Carla. Derek, he said, was a former corporate guy, quiet, probably scared. We approached them carefully, I said. One at a time. We present facts, not fear. We see if they're feeling the same pressure. First, however, I needed my own lawyer. I needed Ben Rosenthal. Ben and I had shared 1,000 bagels and 1,000,000 headaches at Clayton and Weiss. He'd stayed in litigation, becoming a partner known for his methodical, document-driven approach. He was expensive, and he loved a good puzzle. I called him from my car after the diner meeting. Ben, it's Anika Sharma. I need a consult. It's franchise law. He chuckled. I knew your retirement into the coffee business was too peaceful to last. My office. Tomorrow at 4. Ben's office was a monument to organized warfare. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held uniform binders, a digital caseboard glowed on one wall, and the air smelled of sharpened pencils and ambition. He listened, stone-faced, as I laid it out. The ambiguous territory clause, Julian's visits, Marco's experience, the inconsistent contractual language. So they're grooming the herd, Ben said finally, steepling his fingers, testing for weakness, applying soft pressure to see who panics. Classic. Your territorial ambiguity is the hook. They can claim they always intended the geographic center point to be the center of the building's footprint, not the lot, thus shrinking your circle by maybe 75 feet. Enough to open a corporate store just outside your original understanding. What's our move? I asked. Documentation, he said immediately. You start a log, date, time, person, summary of every interaction with Julian or corporate. Save every email and every text. Note the tone. Second, you and your fellow franchisees need to formally request clarification on the territorial definitions from the franchisor's legal department. Force them to put their interpretation in writing. That either locks them into a position or exposes their evasion. And the implied threat of termination? Ben leaned forward. This is key. You must understand the covenant of good faith and fair dealing. It's implied in every contract. They can't use their discretionary powers in a way that destroys your right to receive the fruits of the contract. If they hit you with a minor violation notice right after you start asking uncomfortable questions about territory, that could be argued as bad faith, a retaliation. He walked me through it. The notice would come, he predicted. It would be something trivial, easily fixed. The goal wouldn't be to terminate me, it would be to rattle me, to remind me of their power. When it comes, Ben advised, his voice calm and sure, you cure it. Immediately, perfectly, and document the cure. You send the proof of cure by certified mail. You take away their stick. Then, you keep asking your questions about territory. You separate the issues. Don't let them conflate a paperwork slap on the wrist with your fundamental property rights. It was a masterclass in defensive strategy. I left his office feeling armed, not just alarmed. Marco and I contacted Carla next. She was a former marketing executive, fierce and sharp. Over a secure video call, she confirmed everything. Julian had been praising her demographic penetration while lamenting that her prime territory was walled off from a planned corporate brand experience center. She'd been stonewalling him for months. She was in. More than that, her husband, Raj, was a forensic accountant. If they're cooking the books on the mandatory sales reports they make us submit, or using that data to target us, Raj will find the pattern, she said, her eyes glinting. Derek was harder. He was nervous, afraid of making waves. But when the four of us had a group call, and Carla's husband, Raj, laid out a preliminary analysis showing our so-called underperforming units were all in territories with valuable, upcoming commercial developments, the picture became too clear to ignore. It wasn't about performance, it was about real estate. Derek, voice shaky, agreed to stay in the loop. We were a coalition, a small, secret one. We hired Ben formally, splitting his retainer 4 ways. His first action was to draft a joint letter. It was a work of art, polite, professional, and utterly lethal in its specificity. It came from counsel for our 4 franchise units. It cited the specific territorial clauses from each of our agreements, noted the discrepancies and ambiguities, and referenced the franchisor's recent communications regarding territorial model reviews. It formally requested, pursuant to the duty of good faith and fair dealing, written clarification on 3 precise points: the exact methodology for determining the geographic center point, any planned revisions to the territorial definitions, and the process for franchisee consultation regarding such changes. It was a stake in the ground. It moved the battle from Julian's realm of charming manipulation to the legal department's realm of binding written statements. The reaction was swift. First, Julian's tone changed overnight. A follow-up call he made to me was icy, stripped of all its former bonhomie. When I, calmly, referenced our attorney's letter and asked if he had any update from legal, he went silent for a full 5 seconds. "I'm not at liberty to discuss legal correspondence," he said stiffly. "I suggest you focus on your operations, Anika. Your customer satisfaction scores have a slight downward trend this month." A manufactured concern. I documented it. Then, 3 days after Ben's letter was delivered, I received a FedEx envelope at the café. It was a formal notice of default from Brew and Gather Corporate. My heart hammered for a second before I remembered Ben's coaching. I skimmed it. The violation? My exterior signage. According to the notice, the matte finish on my channel-lit sign had degraded to a semi-gloss sheen in certain weather conditions, violating the operations manual, which demanded a uniform matte appearance. It was absurd. It was also a perfect, curable default. I didn't panic. I called a signage company approved by the manual. I got a written estimate for a full sign refurbishment to exact specifications. I emailed the estimate to the address on the notice with a copy to Ben, stating that the cure was in process and would be completed well within the 30-day cure period. I sent the hard copy via certified mail. I felt a surge of cold satisfaction. They had thrown a pebble. I had documented its trajectory and was having it professionally removed. The final piece came from the franchisor's legal department. Their reply to Ben's letter was a masterpiece of evasion. It thanked us for our inquiry, stated that all franchise agreements were enforced fairly and consistently, and that any territory reviews would be communicated through appropriate channels. It did not answer a single one of our specific questions. Not one. That silence was the loudest confirmation yet. They had no good faith answer. Julian was acting with a mandate. The pressure was building, a slow, steady squeeze. The coalition held, sharing every communication, bolstered by Ben's guidance and Raj's data. We were a small, determined nucleus, pushing back against a diffuse corporate gravity. It ended, as I suppose I knew it would, with a confrontation. It was a Tuesday, just after closing. Leo and the evening crew had left. I was in the back, reviewing Raj's latest analysis, when I heard the front door rattle, then the distinct sound of a key in the lock. Only a few people had a key. Me, Leo, my assistant manager, and the franchisor for emergency access. Julian Thorne walked in. He didn't smile. He wore a dark blazer over his polo now, a cheap attempt at authority. He looked around the empty, dim cafe as if he owned it. In a way, under the rules of the system, he kind of did. Anika, he said, his voice cutting through the quiet. We need to talk. I didn't stand up. I remained seated at my desk in the open office area, forcing him to come to me. Julian, the door was locked. Is there an emergency? He ignored the question, stopping a few feet away, his hands on his hips. This has to stop, this lawyer letter, this conspiring with other franchisees. We're seeking contractual clarity, Julian, as is our right. Your right? He gave a short, derisive bark of laughter. Your right is to run this cafe according to the manual, to pay your fees, to be a team player. You're not a team player, Anika. You're stirring up trouble. You're filling people's heads with legal nonsense. I kept my voice level. The legal department didn't seem to think our questions were nonsense, just difficult to answer. His face tightened. The charming mask was gone, eroded by pressure and arrogance. You think you're so clever, the big shot lawyer. Let me tell you something. You run a coffee shop, one of hundreds. You are replaceable. Your little friends are replaceable. This brand is a machine, and you are a cog. If a cog starts to squeak, we grease it, or we replace it. The contempt was naked now, oily and thick in the air. It wasn't just business to him, it was a matter of hierarchy, and I had forgotten my place. Is that a threat of termination, Julian? On what grounds? A signage finish? He leaned forward, planting his palms on my desk. I caught the synthetic scent of his cologne, stronger now. On whatever grounds we need, operational dissatisfaction, brand misalignment, we have broad discretion. You signed it away. You think your lawyer friend can protect you? He's billing you by the hour to lose. We have deeper pockets. We have more lawyers. We have time. You have a monthly nut to cover. He sneered. How's that small business administration loan feeling now? Still confident? He was trying to hit me where I lived, in the financial anxiety that kept every small business owner awake at night. He wanted to see me flinch. I looked past him, at my cafe, the clean lines, the carefully chosen art, the community bulletin board packed with local notices. This wasn't just a cog. This was my home, and he was a vandal at the door. I met his eyes, letting none of the cold fury I felt show, just a calm, professional assessment. Thank you for clarifying your position, Julian. Is there anything else? I have to lock up. The dismissal in my tone was more infuriating to him than any argument. His face flushed. He straightened up, tugging his blazer down. You're making a huge mistake, a career-ending mistake, for you and your little club. This ends one of two ways. You fall in line, or you fall. Period. He turned on his heel and walked out, leaving the front door swinging open behind him. I listened to his footsteps recede on the sidewalk. The silence he left behind was different now. It wasn't the quiet of alarm or planning. It was the clear, sharp silence of a line drawn. The whispering was over. The war was declared. And I finally saw my enemy, not as a corporate functionary, but as a man who believed he owned us. It was the best intelligence I'd gathered yet. The silence Julian left behind in my cafe wasn't empty. It was charged, like the air before a summer storm. I locked the door, my hands steady. His contempt had been a gift, stripping away the last veneer of plausible deniability. This was no longer a negotiation. It was a contest of wills, and he'd just revealed his hand was all bluff. He thought intimidation was power. He'd forgotten that real power, in our world, was anchored in paper, precedent, and proof. We had all three. The coalition didn't falter after his visit. It solidified. Marco, Carla, Derek and I, guided by Ben and illuminated by Raj's spreadsheets, became a quiet, efficient machine. We documented Julian's after-hours confrontation. We compiled a damning chronology, from the first glowing reviews to the vague territorial hints, to the pressure on Marco, to the bogus signage violation, to the legal department's silence, to the outright threats. This was no story of disgruntled business owners. It was a documented pattern of bad faith, a clear breach of the implied covenant in our contracts. Ben was pleased in his dry litigator way. "He's given you a roadmap to his own dismissal," he said during our weekly call. "The franchisor's biggest vulnerability isn't the territorial ambiguity, though that's a problem. It's the appearance of systemic, rogue behavior by a regional director. It opens them up to claims of tortious interference, and worse, it's a public relations nightmare waiting to happen. No brand-selling community wants a lawsuit alleging they strong-armed their own franchisees." The invitation to the annual Northeast Regional Franchisee Gathering arrived on heavy embossed cardstock. The agenda promised a vision for growth, synergy, and expansion at a bland conference hotel near the airport. Julian would be hosting, with a special guest from corporate strategy. We knew this was the stage. He would unveil his new territorial model, using peer pressure and corporate authority to force our acquiescence. We prepared like it was a trial. The day of the meeting, I dressed not as a cafe owner, but as the lawyer I had been. A tailored navy suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back. I carried a slim leather portfolio. Inside was a single USB drive. Marco, Carla, and Derek met me in the hotel lobby. We exchanged simple nods. Our solidarity was a settled fact. We took seats at different tables, scattering our presence through the room. We were not a block. We were a consensus, waiting to form. The room was a sea of brew and gather polos and anxious hope. About 30 franchisees filled the chairs. At the front, Julian stood beside a podium, laughing too loudly with a man in a suit I didn't recognize, the corporate vice president. Julian looked triumphant, his confidence restored by the audience and the authority figure at his side. He called the meeting to order, his voice booming with false warmth. There were slides about brand growth and new seasonal syrup flavors. It was all preamble, the calming music before the surgery. Then he clicked to a new slide. It was a map of our region. "Now, for the really exciting part," Julian said, his pointer laser dancing over the screen. "Brand evolution demands operational evolution. We've identified key opportunity zones, areas of demonstrated high demand where the brew and gather presence can be maximized for the benefit of the entire network." The laser circle landed on a zone in Hartford, overlapping the edge of the new residential development in Marco's territory. Marco didn't move a muscle. Another circle appeared near Stamford, clipping a high-traffic corridor Carla considered hers. My own heart was a steady drumbeat as the laser skittered to Haversham. A bright red circle bloomed, centered on a new mixed-use development being built a quarter-mile from my café. It overlapped a significant, lucrative slice of what I believed was my protected domain. "These zones represent a new, dynamic approach," Julian continued, his voice slick with visionary fervor. "A chance for corporate to lead the way. Existing franchise partners in adjacent territories will, of course, benefit from the increased traffic and awareness." He was laying claim to our futures with a laser pointer and corporate doublespeak. I saw faces around the room cloud with confusion, then dawning concern. He was counting on that concern to remain passive and unvoiced. "We'll be moving forward with corporate-owned pilot stores in these zones within the next quarter," he announced. "This is the future. We hope all of you will share in our enthusiasm." He smiled, a benediction. "Now, I'd be happy to take a few questions." The room was silent, thick with unease. Franchisees looked at their hands, unsure how to object without seeming anti-growth. I stood up. The movement was smooth and deliberate. Every head turned. Julian's smile froze. "Anika, question?" "A clarification, actually," I said, my voice carrying easily in the quiet room. I walked to the side where a presentation laptop sat on a tech cart. You've shown us proposed corporate stores. For the franchisees here whose territories are adjacent to these zones, could you clarify the basis on which they were drawn? Specifically, how they relate to our existing territorial rights as defined in our franchise agreements? Julian's eyes flickered to the corporate vice president, who was now watching intently. As I said, it's a dynamic model. The agreements grant protected territories, but the brand retains the right to develop corporate stores in areas that serve the overall network strategy. I see. I plugged my USB drive into the laptop. The main screen flickered, and I brought up my first document, a clean scan of Exhibit F from my franchise agreement, the simple circle around my address. I put it side by side with a slide I'd prepared, Julian's new Opportunity Zone map overlaid on the same street grid. The overlap was unmistakable. This is my protected territory per my agreement signed by Brew and Gather, I said, my pointer now in my hand. And this is your proposed corporate store location. They conflict. My question is about the geographic center point clause. When you sold me this franchise, you verbally described my territory as extending to the University District. I clicked again, bringing up my contemporaneous notes from that sales meeting, dated and detailed. The map, however, is ambiguous. Which interpretation governs now? Your past promise, or this convenient new interpretation that shrinks my area? The room was utterly still. Julian's face turned a blotchy red. This is a legal matter, not appropriate for this forum. It became a forum matter when you presented a plan that breaches our contracts, I said calmly, cutting him off. I didn't raise my voice, I sharpened it. And it's not just me. I nodded to Marco. Marco stood. My agreement uses zip codes. Your new zone for Hartford redraws a zip code boundary. On what authority? Carla stood next. My territory is defined by streets. Your proposed zone uses a new, non-existent commercial corridor definition. Can you show us where that definition exists in any Brew and Gather document? We were a cascade, a coordinated, factual bombardment. The other franchisees leaned forward, murmuring. Julian floundered. These are aggressive, isolated interpretations. The brand must grow. Growth cannot come through the breach of your existing contracts, I said, pulling the thread further. I clicked to a new slide, a simple timeline. Let's talk about the pattern of behavior preceding this new vision. I walked the room through it, point by point, our documented evidence clean and clinical on the screen. The targeted praise, the isolated pressures, the bad faith default notice for a matte finish sign, the legal department's evasive response. I named no names beyond Julian's, but the pattern was a neon arrow pointing at him. The corporate vice president was now on his feet, his expression stormy. Julian, what is this? This was the moment. The public humiliation wasn't about yelling. It was about exposure. It was about watching the edifice of Julian's authority crumble under the weight of his own actions, revealed in a well-lit room full of his intended victims. This is a coordinated effort to undermine the brand, Julian spluttered, his voice cracking. No, I said, finally turning fully to face the other franchisees, my voice dropping into a register of shared understanding. This is about holding the brand to its own promises. Territorial rights aren't just lines on a map. They are the foundation of our investment. They determine our customer base, our revenue, our ability to repay loans, and support our families. When those definitions are vague or changed after the fact under pressure, it doesn't maximize brand potential. It destroys franchisee trust. And without trust, this isn't a partnership, it's a predation. The educational point landed not as a lecture, but as a stark, shared revelation. You could see it click on faces around the room. That's why the clause matters. That's how it impacts my operations. That's what he was doing. The corporate vice president, a man named Evans, stepped forward, physically moving between Julian and the podium. This meeting is adjourned, he announced, his voice taut. Franchisees, thank you for your forthright feedback. Corporate will be reviewing these concerns immediately. Julian, with me. Now. The look on Julian's face was the culmination of everything. The arrogance was gone, replaced by stunned, hollow panic. He'd been outmaneuvered on his own stage. He wasn't just wrong, he was professionally naked. He followed Evans out without a backward glance. The room erupted in low, urgent conversation. Franchisees swarmed Marco, Carla, and me with relief and a sudden fierce solidarity. The whispers were now a roar, and they were on our side. The aftermath was swift and quiet. Within a week, Julian Thorne was placed on administrative leave. By the end of the month, he was terminated. Brew and Gather's legal department, now dealing directly with Ben, and clearly fearing a class action style dispute, came to the table. The settlement was everything we'd fought for, and more. Our territorial rights were clarified in amended agreements. My radius was explicitly defined from the center of my property lot. The bogus signage violation was formally rescinded. Most importantly, the franchisor committed in writing to not open any company-owned stores within our protected territories for the duration of our agreements. Ben, ever the strategist, secured us one more thing: a right of first refusal for our coalition on any new franchise sales in adjacent territories. It turned our defensive victory into a strategic advantage. 6 months later, the first true chill of autumn was in the air, but my cafe was warm and bright. Marco, Carla, and I sat at my corner table. Between us lay draft plans for a joint program we were funding: Grounds for Growth, a mentorship and micro-grant initiative for local teen entrepreneurs. The brand manager actually asked if we wanted to make it a national pilot, Carla said, shaking her head with a wry smile. I told him we'd consider it after our local pilot proved successful. Marco chuckled. The new regional director sends birthday cards. Can you believe it? Birthday cards. It's cheaper than lawsuits, I said, sipping my tea. The scent of cinnamon and espresso was no longer just the smell of business. It was the smell of peace, of territory secured. I looked out at the bustling space. The line was steady, the chatter happy, and the community board overflowed. My investment was safe. The trust of my staff and my customers was now bedrock. The victory wasn't in the humiliation of one man. It was in the quiet that followed. It was in the clarity of the rules, and in the hard-earned knowledge that you must read the map more carefully than the mapmaker intended, and be prepared to defend every inch. The whispers of influence hadn't ceased. They just spoke a new language of collaboration, community, and a contract that finally meant what it said.